Oh, look at Lamar Jackson. What a day did he have. Now, he didn't score the game-winning touchdown for the Ravens as they beat the Rams, but he certainly was a big part of why they got there, and he was certainly a big part of helping fantasy managers most likely get to the playoffs for Week 15. But in Week 14, he was an absolute star. 3 passing touchdowns, 1 dominant game on the ground once again, and Lamar Jackson just helping fantasy managers get to the place they need to be, along with some of these other guys here. Look at Breece Hall bouncing back with a big game, involved in the passing game once again. Got another big game from Deebo Samuel, and I was wrong about Evan Ingram, but what a star he was for the Jaguars. No more Christian Kirk. Hello, Evan Ingram, as a must-start fantasy tight end, or at least maybe a superstar to close the season. Time now to give you some winners and losers from Week 14. I'm Jamey Eisenberg. That's Heath Cummings. Heath, we saw the top performers. Now let's go through our winners from this past week. And Evan Ingram, certainly a winner for me. Really just an apology, just based on how he performed. I thought he was going to struggle against the Browns, but that was an absolute star performance. And again, he's now played 7 quarters without Christian Kirk on the field. And Evan Ingram has been a star for the Jaguars, and Trevor Lawrence getting through that game despite the ankle injury, looking like a great fantasy option once again. Joe Flacco is going to help a lot of fantasy managers. We'll show you where he stacks up on the waiver wire list, but going to be the starter for the Browns for the rest of the season, coming through with a big game for the Browns as they beat the Jaguars in that matchup. We thought Austin Eckler might be done, as Joshua Kelly was going to get some more work. Not the case. Eckler having another big game against the Broncos like he typically does. And Garrett Wilson, who has been a little bit tough to trust lately because of the quarterback situation for the Jets, but he comes through with a big game against the Texans because Zach Wilson's back under center, and Zach Wilson got the memo. Where's Garrett Wilson? I'm just going to throw it to him as often as possible, and that's what we want to see for the rest of the year. So Zach Wilson will remain the starter. Garrett Wilson will remain in your starting lineups. Tough matchup coming against Miami, maybe, but as long as he's getting this many opportunities, you're starting him, and you're starting him without hesitation.
Matthew Stafford was a winner with another 3-touchdown performance. Maybe more importantly, Cooper Kupp looked like Cooper Kupp again. That makes him a winner. We had some questions about whether we were starting Kupp. We weren't even considering starting Stafford this week. Now going into the first week of the fantasy playoffs, I don't think there's any question with either one of them. Start Stafford and Kupp. We'll start Isaiah Likely as well, who some of us may have started last week, but it was entirely based on faith. Here, he actually gives us some reason to trust him with 5 catches for 83 yards. But my big winner is James Cook. Since the coaching change for the Bills, we've seen Cook turn into a superstar. In 3 games with the new offensive coordinator, 174 rushing yards, 169 receiving yards, 14 catches, 2 touchdowns, averaging 20 PPR fantasy points per game. The schedule is not great in the fantasy playoffs. I don't care. James Cook is a must-start running back.
15 touches or more in every game with Joe Brady. So the coordinator change has worked out well for the Bills and worked out well for fantasy managers with James Cook. Now let's take a look at some losers here. And you're going to see some big names on both of our lists, which is unfortunate because you want to know, can you trust these guys going into the fantasy playoffs? And Patrick Mahomes might be someone you could have to not trust. I don't know many people that will be benching Mahomes, but as we see here, another down game. He's upset about the calls, understandably so. But he should be upset about the way his players around him are performing and clearly how he's performing himself. Now, again, you have to have a great quarterback on your team to start over Mahomes. But obviously, if you have a Brock Purdy at this point, you're starting Purdy over Mahomes. DeAndre Swift, I think, will bounce back against Seattle in Week 15, but tough matchup against the Cowboys. He's been struggling of late. You look at Stephon Diggs, I think he'll start to get going a little bit as well. But clearly, James Cook has benefited with the coordinator change, not so much Stephon Diggs. And then Sam Laporta, I wouldn't worry too much about him against the Broncos in Week 15, but Jared Goff is struggling right now, so Laporta just got to knock him down a little bit. So we got to praise him when he does well, but unfortunately have to recognize when he does poorly, and he was not very good in this week's game against the Bears.
Speaking of the Bears, Khalil Herbert seems to have fallen out of favor in this backfield. His 2nd consecutive game with single-digit touches. He's not just a guy you can't start. I'm not sure he's a guy that you need to roster right now. Jamar Chase with a big-time letdown. Now, this is kind of one of those in that Mahomes mold. You're probably not going to sit Jamar Chase, but I'd kind of gone back after last week to thinking that Jamar Chase was still a top 10, no doubt about it, wide receiver. Maybe more of a number 2 in the fantasy playoffs. Dallas Goedert came back. That's good. 4 catches for 30 yards. That's bad. It's been an up and down season for Goddard, and I'm not sure he's a must-start tight end. He's still a top 12 guy, but more of the low-end variety. The big loser, though, Jared Goff, showing once again that you cannot trust this guy outdoors. Now averaging 9 more fantasy points per game indoors than he has outdoors. Now, here's the good news. Jared Goff doesn't play outdoors again this season, so you may want to just kind of be, okay, that was a bad performance if you had to start him. He's still going to be a borderline top 12 guy moving forward for me.
Yeah, tough matchup, though, against the Broncos in Week 15. We'll see how he does. Hopefully, again, moving back home will be good for Jared Goff. All right, Heath, we got a lot of injuries that we're dealing with coming off of Week 14. Let's help some fantasy managers in the playoffs with a look at the early waiver wire for Week 15. And one of those injury situations is in Minnesota with Alexander Mattison dealing with an ankle sprain. We don't know high ankle sprain, low ankle sprain, but Ty Chandler has had some good moments stepping in for Cam Akers as the number 2 running back in Minnesota. We'll see how he does in a game against the Bengals, which has been very favorable. So Ty Chandler will be a potential must-start option if Madison has to miss any time. Brian Robinson, we'll see if his hamstring injury healed coming off the bye, but if he's out, Antonio Gibson will definitely be involved in the passing game for the Commanders. We'll see if he picks up some options in the running game as well, but 2 running backs you're looking to add for sure. And then don't go away from the Chiefs, guys. I know it wasn't the best game against the Bills, but you're still looking at double digits in touches for Clyde Edwards-Helaire in that loss against Buffalo. Jarrett McKinnon scored a touchdown. You want to roster those running backs just in case things start to produce for them, depending on how long Isaiah Pacheco is out. But you want to make sure they're on your fantasy team if you can afford to carry them. And then a couple quarterback situations. Remember, C.J. Stroud suffered a concussion. We don't know how long Justin Herbert will be out with the finger injury if he plays at all the rest of the season. So Jake Browning's been very good stepping in for Joe Burrow the last 2 weeks. And Joe Flacco's been very good as the starter for the Browns. Both those guys, something we never thought we would say, could be fantasy league winners if you need a quarterback for Week 15 and beyond.
I'm looking at a couple of Ravens if I'm looking for a pass catcher. We already talked about Isaiah Likely, but he did finally show us something, in 1 week's worth of production when you're attached to Lamar Jackson in this offense makes you pretty close to a must-start tight end. I'd view Likely as a top 10 tight end for this week and for the fantasy playoffs. And then his teammate, Odell Beckham, we talked before their bye about how good his target per route run rate was, how good he was yards per route run. He just wasn't a full-time player. Well, we saw him as more of a full-time player this week, tied for the team league and team targets. You look ahead to Week 15, these Baltimore Ravens face the Jacksonville Jaguars defense that has given up 65 points over the last 2 weeks to Joe Flacco and Jake Browning. Can you imagine what Lamar Jackson's going to do?
Should be a lot of fun to see Baltimore operate, so go get Likely, go get Beckham if you need some options at tight end, at wide receiver. All right, Heath, we got 2 Monday night games we got to look at, so we don't have to worry about just the 1-game slate. We got to get a full lineup here, so we'll show everybody what we're looking at here, and a lot of similarities in our lineup, but I think it's an obvious choice to go with the Dolphin stack here of Tua Tagovailoa, Tyreek Hill, and throw Devon Achane in there as well. Those 3 playmakers should be awesome against that Titans defense, and certainly the run defense is going to be missing Jeffrey Simmons. So the secondary should struggle to stop Tua and Tyreek Hill, and the run game for Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert should be successful. Saquon Barkley should have a big day against that Packers defense. They're banged up on the defensive side as well. You have no Christian Watson, so it should be a good opportunity for Jaden Reed and Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks. You see I'm playing Reed and Wicks in this lineup, and there are not a lot of good tight end options this week, so go with Chigo Okonkwo. Hopefully keeps playing and producing for Will Levis like he has the last couple of weeks. And then I don't think we're going to see a lot of Derrick Henry producing at a high level in this game against Miami because of what the expected outcome should be. So Tyjae Spears just get an opportunity to play a lot, as we saw last week. Last week, Henry suffered a head injury. This week, he may just be on the bench because of the score, and Spears could be involved in the passing game, which should be fun against Miami.
I'm not sure this has ever happened before, but Jamey and I are showing you what the chalk is. If you want to win a tournament, you might have to play somebody different, because I have only one different player in my lineup from Jamey, and it's a different rookie speedster wide receiver, Jalen Hyatt. Hopefully he can get behind that Packers defense for a big score. You're going to have to pick one dart throw cheap wide receiver, and I think both Hyatt and Wick should be 2 of the top best options.
And Hyatt coming off a huge game last time we saw him for the Giants, and Tommy DeVito to Jalen Hyatt could be good for a lot of fantasy managers tonight, certainly if you're playing DFS. All right, that'll do it for us with our winners and losers, but make sure you check out our Fantasy Football Today podcast, wherever podcasts are found. Don't forget our Fantasy Football Today Dynasty podcast as well. Just starting to look ahead to the upcoming offseason, but the Fantasy Football Today podcast, the best podcast in the business. We are helping you win your fantasy leagues in 2023.